couldn't do any and all of the last part of that without Sally Ranney, who is actually not only the co-founder of the American Renewable Energy Institute and the Ardèche Summit, but also the president of our institute, which I chair and act as the CEO. And so I'm delighted to be here with Sally to co-interview, I might say, one of our esteemed members of the press and media for so many years, Forrest Sawyer. And while I don't have your bio in front of me, Forrest, I do realize that you have anchored Nightline for many years, and that you were very active as a war correspondent, I believe, before that. And perhaps maybe that's a really good place to jump in because, you know, war is seemingly upon us now in the Middle East, as an example, many other areas. But perhaps the war that I really want to talk about today is the war that we're waging against Mother Nature by burning all of these greenhouse gases. And perhaps that's the most, the war that imperils us the most out of all of them, and in fact supersedes and trumps the rest. So that might be a good place to just dive right in.
They were wonderful, spiritual, and so on. I was getting a little nervous because I tend to be on the other side of things, having come from the media, until Sally mentioned that the world has this duality, kind of yin and yang, the spiritual sense, and then the shall we say, the material struggle that's going on. And it reminded me of, and forgive the name dropping, but it makes sense. I had a wonderful dinner with a couple of brilliant men, a man named John Hart, who is an environmental scientist at Berkeley and a climatologist, and Daniel Ellsberg, who some of you may recall was a RAND analyst on nuclear weapons before he went rogue. And you know, there's a lot of talking and wine and going up. And John's position was, you realize we got like maybe 20, maybe 30 years, and after that it's too late, we've hit a tipping point. So we got to get our act together or else we're all doomed. And Dan's position was, you think that's doomed, I got you doomed right here. Nuclear weapons aren't even controlled, they're running loose, we're probably going to get nuked here pretty soon. And they turned to me and I said, I'm just basking in the fact that for once I'm the optimist in the room. And Hart told a story about not being an optimist, but being somebody who works on in the face of whatever you find, because these guys are on the front line and they see the deterioration taking place. He has gone to Colorado for God knows how many years, 40 years. He's in his late 70s now, maybe 50 years. And there's a plot of land where he and Paul Ehrlich, who you will recall studied monarch butterflies and talked about the population explosion, is a somewhat irascible man, but a brilliant scientist. And they go there every summer for a month and study it, and they have done it all these years. And John, as the junior member of the team, would always get up very early, and before breakfast he would go down to Paul's cabin and wait for him outside, respectfully. When they would take their morning constitutional, come back, eat breakfast, and then work all day. This has gone on all this time. And since the beginning until now, he would wait for Ehrlich to come down, and Ehrlich would usually keep him waiting a while. And then Ehrlich would come down, walk right to his face, and say, "We are so fucked." And they'd go for a walk. Now, you've seen what's happened with monarch butterflies, and I think Ehrlich, you know, might actually believe that. But he has never once stopped working in the face of opposition. Never once. The head of the New York Zoological Society, the head veterinarian, I had a chance to talk with him, and I said, how do you keep from being depressed? Because we're really living through the 6th great extinction in the world. And you go all around the world and you see what's happening to elephants, you see what's happening to big cats, you see what's happening everywhere. And he said, what is our option? We work on. We work on and we keep the faith. So I can give you some readout on what the media is doing and why we're in the situation that we're in, but in the face of whatever I tell you, realize that my position is the same as theirs. We work on, and we hold faith with the planet. Now, an interesting bit of news. I like to give a little bit of news. Rupert Murdoch commented on climate today. And he was asked what he thinks about climate change, and he said, well, I think we should all move a little further inland. And that's kind of the problem that we're facing right now in terms of bringing about change. Some recent polls have suggested that more than half the American people, and it wavers on the number, but 50 to 60% anyway, either think that the notion of climate change is a vast liberal plot, or they think that it's happening but it's not being caused by humans. It's just one of those things that comes along and goes away. Or they're very deeply confused. And they think, well, he says this and she says that, but let's not mess with things until we're really sure. Now, everybody here knows that this is settled science. So the question is, why do so many Americans think exactly the opposite? And it becomes an even bigger question when you look at those polls in relation to other countries. Ask the Chinese about anthropogenically induced climate change. 93% say it's happening, it's bad, and it's human action that's causing it. Of all the first world countries, which are the big polluters, we are last. Or put another way, we are first in climate denial. And so the question that I think that you're kind of getting at in terms of the media is, how can that be? How can it be in a country where we have so much information moving, we have so much data available, it is clear as a bell, how can we be that stupid?
And the second part of that question, I think, is why is the errant comment or some paragraph or statement pulled out of a document and spun in such a way as to create the confusion, to create the doubt?
In order to create the confusion and the doubt.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And the media takes it and they fly with it.
Oh, they love to look for a squirrel. But let me walk there and say that it's not only the media's fault. And the media have been having some problems here, and I'll tell you why. But it's also our nature. As we evolved, it was wise to be conservative. By that I don't mean politically conservative. I mean conservative in your decision making. Until very, very recently in our evolutionary history. The world you were born in is the world you died in. And your elders were very wise, and they could tell you things that worked and didn't work. They could tell you which berries would likely poison you, and you would stay away from them. And you would only bring great change if you had to. So that's kind of wired into us. We need to be that way. We're also wired to be tribal. We are bound by the people that we can identify with. Now, I love the notion that it's much wider than that, but you have to overcome this feeling of tribalism that exists in the world today. And the third thing that is important to know about how people operate is that they don't really work on data. They don't operate on numbers and information in that way. We operate on story. We always array it into some meaningful story. We can't gather meaning until we have a story. And those three inclinations make us susceptible to campaigns of misinformation and disinformation. We, in the world that is so turbulent, that is changing beneath our feet, many people who don't understand what's happening, and on a global sense, that's most of us, become very fearful and retreat. How many of you know what an octopus trap is? Octopus trap, old-time octopus trap. In Asia, they still use them. It's just basically a clay pot, like this, with a small mouth. And they lower the clay pot down into the ocean, to the bed, and leave it there for a time. And octopi love these places because they're protected places. They're little caves, little places. And a clay pot is perfect. So as they go around, they find it, they crawl into the clay pot and feel happy as octopi. And then the fisherman just lifts the rope up and the octopus has a decision to make. Does he retreat back into the clay pot, which is the most natural thing to do, because that's what he's always done, or does he make a break for it and live? Invariably, the octopus retreats back into the clay pot. And what I think a lot of people are doing right now is retreating into our own little clay pots. We're gathered around with the people that we know and trust, that we feel good about, and we listen to the people who sound like the people that we know and trust. And what's happened in the media, which has made this even worse, is that we thought the internet was going to be this glorious opening of information spigots, and in fact it has. I mean, if you really look for it, if you work hard, you can find all manner of information. But it's also siloed information. And so it has politically created something that some people call epistemic closure. We go and listen to the people who talk like the people we want to talk. Fox News viewers, watch Fox. MSNBC viewers have people who are more liberal, which is very interesting since Comcast is not liberal at all, and I can tell you why that's happening. And then you can see that also in how the things that people go to on the internet, on the web, the websites that they go to. They are self-selecting into groups. And as a consequence, they are not only not talking to each other, they don't speak the same language. They haven't got a clue what the other side is doing, but they know it's bad because they were told. It's really bad. I have a friend of mine, I like him very much. He's an avid Fox News viewer. And I know what he'll want to talk about that day because of whatever he watched. It's just like a little trigger that happens. And we are being wired to respond this way. And as a consequence, we've got an absolute gridlock. I was talking to my good friend Wes Clark over there. We were at another turbulent event some years back. And he said, you know, it's just we're not going anywhere. And he's right. But we are going somewhere, which is entropy. The more we sit still and don't do anything, the more it begins to deteriorate. And you want to say, and I want to say, that the media have an important role to play to educate people. They're not doing it. And there are many reasons for that.
Well, you know, at this point, I'd like to quote Upton Sinclair when he said that if a man's salary is tied to him not understanding something, it's very difficult to get him to understand that. And so I guess the question I would pose to you is that, you know, given the role of the media, whether it be ABC Nightline or Fox News or CNN, where the global grid now is connected and through the internet, and that's how we receive our information, even down to our little mini computers that we all carry around and we're checking, you know, pretty much constantly. And that we are now facing a time when the connectivity of information is such that that we can make some collective choices through that technology and through the leadership of our international anchors, I think. How can you address that piece of the responsibility of the media, given that, you know, you're hired by the person that owns the corporation, like Rupert Murdoch in the case of Fox, and then the truth, the physical, scientific truth of our world?
Well, let me start off with a sort of unfortunate aspect of this, and then I can move to a more positive view of it. The answer is, it ain't going to happen in traditional media, period. They are owned by very large corporations now, and those very large corporations are beholden to their shareholders. And when Disney bought ABC, they really wanted ESPN, they bought the ABC News and said, we'll take them. Then GE bought NBC, and Viacom had CBS. So the news divisions were these little tiny things. And they had been previously owned by broadcasters who had grown up with the idea that they have a public service that has to be performed. You don't get to use the airwaves unless you perform a public service. And when I was at ABC, I worked with a man who I thought was a genius and incredibly brave named Roone Arledge, who built Wide World of Sports, who built World News Tonight, who started Nightline, and so many other things. And I was always eager to go out and do really weird things. Like in the Gulf War, I wanted to go out on my own because I didn't like having a minder watching over my shoulder, which Dick Cheney made sure we had. So I went rogue, and I had to go to Roone and say, Roone, just let me do it. And he said, ah, kid, go ahead. And he was that. They fired him. You know? And the news divisions became important to them when they realized, one, they could make a lot of money, and two, it could help them in Washington. It's really good when you have a news division and you're lobbying for something. But that means that, as a consequence, that they too are captured. They're not going to do anything that is too far outside the clean line of establishment. And two, it's so broken apart that they're fighting over small audiences now. And, you know, if you, I just was reading an analysis of somebody who had broken into, I think it was The View, with a report on Iraq, and the outrage of the viewers was just through the roof. And you can actually track minute by minute nowadays on, even less than that, you can see it in live, in real time, how viewers are moving in and out. And if you put on something that's foreign news, if you put on something that is not within the main frame, they're gone. We once, I had a program called Day One, which is an evening program, and we once wanted to do a story on some children in Romania who were under terrible pressure. And we said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put it on. We know we're under ratings pressure, so we'll put a cheery story up here and another cheery story up here, and we'll hammock it in between. And you could see the viewership went like this. They literally know. So they ain't going to do that. Now, in cable, it's a different story. They've got their own little niche, right? So 2 million people is a lot of people watching a single program. Just 2 million people out of 370 million. 600,000 ain't bad. So you can target to a very narrow audience. NBC, which has conservative owners, knew that the conservative piece was taken by Rupert Murdoch, who likes to do politically oriented programming. And Brian Robertson and those folks don't really care. And so they went to the left side of the equation. And CNN just went wobbling off to get drunk. So that's where we are in cable news. So if you think that's the solution, it's not. However, what we heard earlier in the conversation, and what Sally was talking about, is that it's happening around them. All real revolutions happen around established forces. The established forces have no interest in furthering the kind of change that is necessary in order for us to deal with climate change. And so you're seeing small groups that are pulling together, becoming a bit larger. You're seeing people who are saying, you know what, we've got to establish some real methods of change. And the voices must have not only data behind them, as climate scientists do, they must have passion, and they must have story, and they must have meaning. And we must tell those stories over and over and over again in forums like this and forums in other places. And we must gather in wherever we can. Now, is that enough? Frankly, given the rate of change, I haven't got a clue. But what's our alternative? So I can tell you why the media aren't doing it. I can't tell you that they're going to do it because I don't think they will.
What do you think about the impact on how a democracy works when you've got so much misinformation and an erosion of values, when Lindsay Lohan and murders and stories like that get the headlines, and then behind that some of the really serious issues that are facing not only the country but humanity, you know, are not addressed or minimally addressed. And then on the other side of that, if you're in the internet and it's all silos and you're not speaking to each other, so that creates polarization. in the political arena, as well as one-to-one, because people don't honor civil conversation much anymore. There's a lot of overtalk. There's a lot.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
There's a lot of overtalk. There's a lot of disagreement. There's, So how can a democracy survive when the nerve center, the nervous system, really is the media and news and the internet? And if it's all negative and it's polarized or misinformation, how can we survive a democracy?
Well, you begin with the assumption that I don't necessarily hold, which is that our democracy has survived. I don't think we really have what you and I value as a democracy, in which one vote engenders one response, and the people, by voting for their representatives, get representatives who will speak for their interests. Now, that's been changing for a long time. And there are any number of studies which have shown that a lot of things that are happening which ain't so good. One of them is that we are now in the best political system that money can buy, and we have a lot of money to buy it. The problem is, I don't have any of that money. There are only a very tiny few people that do, and they're willing to spend a lot of it. Two, we've become increasingly good at the psychological massage of messaging. Frank Luntz, who is a kind of a pollster analyst for the Republican side of the equation, says, don't ever talk about the estate tax, talk about the death tax. Death tax sounds just bloody awful. But estate tax looks a little different. So the language sparks things in our lower brain. And this is what you're going to see in the midterm elections. This is what you see in every election. I will say about my opponent, I know there's a rumor going around that he has sex with chickens. I myself would never say such a thing.
Yeah.
In fact, I have no reason to believe that he has sex with chickens. Now, if you want to know whether he has sex with chickens, and I'm not saying that he does, you should go talk to those people who say he is having sex with chickens. Now, people just hear sex with chickens and the opponent's name. That forces him to say, I don't have sex with chickens. And forevermore, he's remembered as the guy who has sex with chickens. And this is done all the time. It's just name calling and mudslinging, and that's all we do. Now, in California, where I'm abiding these days minute by minute, we don't see many political ads because it's just kind of all blue. But if you're in Iowa or if you're in any of the purple states, you are bombarded with ads, and you are just massaged endlessly with lies. And Mitt Romney, God bless him. Some people think he's now the front runner for the nomination. His campaign was prevaricating every step of the way. They were just saying all kinds of stuff. And journalists, hardworking journalists, and believe me, there are many, many wonderful, hardworking journalists, would call him out. And they say, we are not going to be stopped from saying what we believe based on that accusation. And they would keep saying nonsense because they genuinely believed it would work. And it usually does. The other point is that in elections now, what we're seeing is fewer and fewer people are voting. Somebody did an analysis, I think at Princeton, of how much voter fraud has actually taken place. And out of the countless millions over 50 years, they found 31 provable voting fraud instances. And yet we have voting fraud laws that are being passed in states, and I think what we know is really happening there, they're trying to limit who votes. Gerrymandering is controlling the House today. Because of gerrymandering after 2010 census, ain't nobody going to change the makeup of the House. And remarkably, the Senate's probably going, you've got a 60% chance the Senate will tip Republican.
Do you think that...
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
Analysis has been done on who these folks vote for once they get in there. And no matter who put them in the office, they vote for the ones who pay for them. So we have the best government money can buy, which gives you an idea that money doesn't buy much.
And speaking of gerrymandering, but this time from the media, let's go back to 2000 when Al Gore ran against George Bush. And there was a late night count, and all of a sudden, even though the major networks had come out declaring Gore the winner in Florida, at 1:15 a.m., there was a newscaster, I think it was, not sure, that's right, to head Chads, all the way up to the woman who worked in the state of Florida, would hit the major networks nightly.
I can't remember her name. Catherine something.
I think it was overly.
Catherine Harris.
Right, I remember she was overly made up, I think, and then ultimately the Supreme Court. Now that one moment in media history seemed to have changed the direction and the course of history of the world, including the Iraq War, and subsequently what followed, and I dare say perhaps even influenced the crash of the economy in 2008, depending on how you connect those dots. So can we go back to that moment in time and maybe recall some other moments like that?
Well, there are a lot of them. That particular moment, you got to understand that there was a lot of, Jeb Bush was the governor at the time of Florida. And, you know, I grew up in Florida. I know Florida very well. I work with Florida. Florida's a friend of mine. And you know, somebody got the reference, good. And Florida's crazy. You know, they're just kind of weird. And anybody who elects Rick Scott is kind of weird. I'm sorry, I don't work in... There was something called caging going on, which is essentially purging the voter rolls. So if anybody had a name that sounded like a felon, they could be purged. So a lot of votes were purged before the election ever took place. Then after the election, there was, as you know, tremendous question. And I think it is fair. Let that first part be set aside. It is fair to say it was not clear who won the Florida election. The hanging Chad part was because in Dade County, they had this really stupid ballot, and there were a lot of left-wing Jews who were voting for Pat Buchanan. And the chances of that happening are, you know, about as much as me sprouting wings and flying off. But, so how do they determine this? So this goes on and on and on and on. The issue got down to really narrow questions. The Gore people probably should have pressed for a statewide recount rather than recount in certain areas, thereby opening a door for the courts to look at it a different way. But all that said, it came down to the Supreme Court making a decision which they said was a one-off and could not be a precedent for anything whatsoever. And the reason that they had to stop the recount was because there was a chance that the winner, George Bush, might not be legitimized. He might lose. And so they elected the president. 5 justices elected the president. I think that was a terrible mistake by the Supreme Court, and I think they've continued to make very strange decisions, which has now put the legitimacy, along with Congress and the executive branch, the legitimacy of the judicial branch in question. If you look at any of the polls right now in America, Americans are just downright steamed. They don't like anything. They don't like anybody. I mean, cockroaches have a better poll than Congress. Ebola's doing better than Congress. That's not a joke. So what that means is they won't go to the polls. And 13 people will elect the next president. And so, I can empty a room in no time. I'm just saying that traditional politics is stuck, and it's not going to get unstuck anytime soon. So again, you got to do workarounds. You got to work with people that make you feel good. You got to work with people who have faith and trust and hope and have a vision. The kinds of vision we were hearing about this morning. Because if you go down this rabbit hole, it just gets stranger and stranger.
There's somewhat of a feeling in America, and I think I recall there was a poll that there's a dumbing down of information for people, and that instead of going to the highest common denominator or a higher common denominator in creating stories, relating stories, it goes the other way. And
You're talking traditional media now?
yeah, traditional media. And consequently, that values are being eroded because people watch, I mean, some of the statistics on how much TV or video games, et cetera, that children watch up to the age of 12 is just stunning, just absolutely stunning. So my question is that what's your perspective on that? The dumbing down, the erosion of values, going to the lowest common denominator, choosing stories. Does the traditional media choose stories because that is really what people want to see? They want to see murders, you know, they want to see Lindsay Lohan, they want to see those things versus real news like CNN used to have. CNN was real news, and it's completely shifted.
With the rose-colored glasses of age, I look back and say, you know, we really did wonderful stuff and all that kind of, but I don't know how great we were. You know, we were generalists and we were doing our best, and we were trying to do stories that were unafraid, especially Nightline. But I think we got a lot of things wrong because we didn't have enough information. You know, when I would anchor Nightline, I prided myself on doing all manner of research. And that was back when there was Nexus Lexus. Yeah. And so, you know, I would get a stack of stuff like this, and I would read it all. And eventually it struck me, you know, when I read it, I'm reading the same thing over and over again, because reporters would go to Nexus Lexus and download the thing, and then they would write something along that line. So you kind of get this closed loop. And when the internet was just emerging, I was curious about it, and I remember I interviewed a pianist. I don't know anything about classical music, but I did the best I could. And I went to the internet to see how it was playing, and it was mostly, did you see what that idiot was asking last night? He knows nothing. And I think he's right. So the idea that people can go bounce from one story to another story to another story with any depth is, first of all, just wrong. You know, you just do the best you can, but you're going to be like 2 inches deep. Mm-hmm. And the idea that traditional media, again, will do deep stories isn't going to work, because you really do need to, if you want to make ratings, which is what they want to do, they want to sell stuff. So if you want rating and you want to keep your job, then you're going to go somewhere around, you know, 8th grade level, because that's what works. People will watch around 8th grade level. And, you know, but the great, interesting thing, the wonderful experiment that's happening right now that's so exciting is, you know, millennials. I love millennials. I don't know what they're doing, but it's really interesting. They don't watch television news. They think it's absurd. They have a radar that'll blow your brains out. And they just sort of find their ways. It's like organic. And they gather information osmotically. I think I should just go follow some millennials around and try to learn something, because they know some things that we don't know. And they're learning in ways that we're not. And I think that there's great hope in the way that they come together collectively and gather and separate and come together again. It's fascinating to see. And again, I put my weight there. I don't put it in these old ways of doing things which have brought us to this point. Mm-hmm. This is really a long tail. Network television. Anybody watch ABC News? Television? How many know that Diane Sawyer just announced she was retiring? Okay, like 6 of you. Back in the day, if an anchor retired from the evening news, it was like, holy mother of God. Mm-hmm. The Pope has stepped down. So now Diane has retired to be replaced by who? Who knows? David who? David Muir. This lady knows. You scare me. He's the weekend anchor. And he's the evening news anchor. So it's just slowly disappearing into the West.
And is that a function of the internet then?
Function of all of these things, but who cares what they put on in 22 minutes when I already know all of it already? And by the way, I can break it down for you. It's really 22 minutes of news, and it's really the first 2 blocks. So that's about, let's be generous and say 11 minutes of news that are parsed into 1.5-minute stories. Do you know what you can say in 1.5 minutes? It just happened. It's really a lot. See you later. And I can get that so much faster on the internet, so much deeper on the internet, and that's what people are doing.
So let me ask a question. Sally wanted, and I believe still wants to, wouldn't it be nice if we had an evening broadcast called Matter of Degree? And we talked about how the globe is warming. And we talked about real issues that affect our lives, like we're talking about today. But this time now it's on, the CBS Evening News. And instead of leading with it, if it bleeds, it leads, and how many people did they kill in Gaza today? Rather, how many bees are being impacted, and leading in, or just the fact that we need to move in the right direction to sustain ourselves instead of, down these paths of destruction. And then to have that conversation led by dynamic women, such as Sally, to be able to guide that conversation along so that when we have these meetings like COP15 in Copenhagen and we're looking towards COP21 in Paris, that the global media audience is keyed in on issues that profoundly impact them. I'm just,
First, it's a wonderful idea. And second, some people are already beginning to do these kinds of ideas, and nothing is stopping you from doing it. Back in the day, it was a bottleneck. There were only so many avenues to get your message out. You could get the newspapers, or you could get a magazine, or you could get a broadcast news operation, or you could try to get on local news. And that was it. Now, it's wide open. You can do anything. A good friend of mine is named Greg Dalton, works in San Francisco. He used to work for the Commonwealth Club. We went for a trip up to the Arctic Circle, and he was so astonished by what's happening so quickly that he started a program called Climate One, where he interviews some of the best and brightest working in the field of climate change, and then he makes it available on podcast, and now he's just gotten some distribution on PBS. Had to work his way up, and he's going to be on, I think, once a month, but God bless him, I think he'll get further and further and further. The idea that you're going to walk on the door and knock on CBS News and say, I think I should anchor a little something for you, is not going to happen. But you can do and you don't want it to happen. You want to have control over what you're doing, and you want to do your own show. And there's a program called The Real News, started by some great producers who are giving alternative views on what's happening in the Middle East and what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening in the financial turbulence that we've had. And it has relatively small viewers, but then it gets picked up by other websites and echoed. And this is where change is going to take place. This is how the messages are going to be getting out. So you could anchor that tomorrow.
Well, Telemundo, one of the largest
Sure.
television companies in Latin America, just put a climate desk on. Someone that is going to cover climate at least once a week, but it was not at their own initiative. It was because the UN Foundation and some others really started pushing on them, and also did a bit of underwriting so that they had, they had some financial bedrock there to go.
Do you like the idea of somebody going in with money and underwriting news coverage in principle?
Well, it's a really good question, but it happens all the time because advertisers are underwriting the news right now. For example...
Well, that's a little different than saying, I want you to put on this kind of news and have this particular orientation, and I will pay for the cost of doing it.
Well, it's like an advertiser saying, I will underwrite O'Reilly's program, and somebody else says, I'll underwrite your climate news. I'm your advertiser here.
No, it's not the same. The advertisers who go on Bill O'Reilly buy a block of ads with Fox News, and they buy it from the advertisers, and Bill O'Reilly doesn't know what ads are going to run in his program. All he knows is what his ratings are. There are people who do, and there's a big industry right now of people who do videos, and then they offer them free to local television stations, and they look and feel like news, but they're not news. They're canted in a particular direction, and a lot of local stations just pick it up because it fills time. So I appreciate the idea that, you know, we could get some great stuff out, but that opens the door to any number of other things. Personally, I prefer, if you're a journalist, not to be underwritten by anybody and not to know who is paying for anything except that you're getting paid and you're going to go out there and do the best job that you can.
But that seemed to be the only way to get that kind of a coverage. So I
Is it
think
okay
it's
if the
better.
Koch brothers then go on behind that with their own?
They already do.
Where?
Well, they've got so many 501c4s that
No. On television,
No, I know that they support, who put ads on television that are not supportive of some of the things that we're talking about here.
But again, they're ads. They're defined as ads.
Now,
There is supposed to be a
PBS
separation.
has programs that are underwritten.
Yes.
PBS does.
PBS does. And there was a furor around the idea of WNET, the Channel 13 in New York, taking a bunch of money from the Koch brothers to do a story, a whole hour, on what the Koch brothers wanted them to do. And they said, "Are you crazy?" And I think they got so burned by doing that they won't do it again. So to the degree that somebody wants to underwrite it, God bless you, but you can't tell us what to put on the air, is my position. Now, there are lots of folks who would say, yeah, you know, I'll put whatever you want on. But I don't like those folks. I don't think those folks are practicing news. I think they're diminishing news. They're turning it into exactly what I've been decrying here and saying we don't want. What I want are journalists who are free to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. And to the degree that we still have some of those, God bless them, because they're out there in some of the hardest places in the world. And they're getting killed willy-nilly.
Well, how do you deal with the issue of the reporters, the news desks that, you know, where 99 scientists say, you know, it's happening, and one says it isn't, but they get half the column in the newspaper?
God, I love this question. This is one of the great problems in journalism today, because it's in their DNA. You know, if you talk to somebody and he says something rotten, you just, about somebody else, you want to naturally run to that other person and give him a chance to say something. It's just what you do. You know, you try to be, as some news organization says, fair and balanced. But in truth, that's really what you did try to do. You tried, some people even use the word objective, although that's kind of not a reasonable thing, but you really are trying to do the right thing. Now, if you don't know much about it, you will probably weight it in the wrong way. And to your point, this is a disaster for climate coverage. It's a disaster because, you know, you've got these people who are howling at the moon as soon as they hear something that says climate change is really bad. You got to put our people on you, and they just beat them up with sticks to get their people on. It's a war that's going on over this kind of coverage. But the stone cold fact of the matter is, it is climate change. It is settled science. And they got to stop this.
Well,
Whoever clapped, God bless you.
but
It's the same thing. I think the earth is not flat. You think it's flat. Let's debate. That's ridiculous. But we're doing that sort of thing all the time. You know, this lawsuit against Obama, whether you like his policies or you don't like his policies, the idea that they want to sue him over not moving fast enough to implement something that they voted 50 times to get rid of seems strange. But you'll hear both sides. And I think it's I hope they get out of it. I mean, there are a lot of organizations that are trying to stop that.
But doesn't that beg the point of the fact that, you know, the worldwide economy is approximately 60 trillion GDP, and that is based on the extraction and burning of fossil fuels. And because this is, and the USA is 20, China's 10, that's half of the world's economy. And yet the two countries put up half of the global emissions. And so what we're talking about here at the summit is, and in this particular conversation, is the media's role in reporting the truth. And how can we break through, back to that Upton Sinclair quote, where we've got to come up with a new paradigm that's going to support our continued evolution and literally switch that to an economy that's based on the implementation of clean, renewable technologies.
But I think it's even more than that. I mean, this is the great, great challenge that we face. The nature of our economic system is communism has been roundly defeated. And we have now a kind of capitalism which emphasizes growth. And I think we all know that trees don't grow to the sky. And in the absence of growth, there is, deterioration. Furthermore, all discussions in the economic world take place really around what they call the economy. And these other things, what we call the world, are externalities. And this is how things can get pushed into the common, and everybody has to pay for the price of what one corporation's poisoning amounts to. Now, we can't continue with that kind of economic system. But the problem is there's going to be a massive struggle to bring about that change. There are very powerful people who really like the way that it is and are going to work very hard to maintain the way that it is. But I think you and I would agree it can't go on like this. So what we need is a fundamental re-understanding of what we mean by economy and who benefits from the economy and how. This is a huge question, and happily a lot of people are struggling with it, but not enough.
And how do you cover that at the 8th grade level?
You really don't, do you? I mean, you could. You absolutely could.
Okay.
And there are progressive schools that do. But that question will never arise on Meet the Press. There are assumptions. And this is the great problem. Whatever assumption you have with an argument is going to define where you wind up, right? So we have some basic assumptions about what constitutes the world that I think in the previous conversation you were hearing are being challenged, and rightly. And more people around the world are saying, this is not working for me. And they may not know where to look or how to look, but they know that they're unsettled. They know this ain't working. And that's where the wedge is. That's where you can begin to open the conversation. Whether you like her policies or not, Elizabeth Warren is making great traction because all she talks about is, how's your life? Is it better today or is it not better today? Do you think there should be a living wage or do you not? Do you think it's okay that people who have a job still have to live on food stamps? Do you think it's okay that you're going to go bankrupt if you have an accident? And people are resonating to that, whether they're Republican or not.
You mentioned Elizabeth Warren, and we have 10 minutes left, and I want to get to the Earth's call, so let's not forget that.
Yeah, I get $25 for that plug, so.
Oh, really? Well, that's why I brought it up.
And this is some good news.
Yeah, but before we get there, I'd like to talk about the fact that now
Well, wait, I'd like to say there's a lot of good news in what I said.
Yes.
It's just that it bubbles up from the bottom, which is, to your point, leading from behind. It'll rise. It'll rise. It always does. That's where change comes.
So talking about change and talking about the transition and talking about leadership from women, and I'd like Sally to address this also, that we're in a midterm election year and we're looking towards a national election in 2016. And a lot of us in the room think that Hillary Clinton is going to be our Democratic candidate. Or maybe it's Elizabeth Warren, perhaps. But the point is that is America, from your perspective, ready for the first woman president? Is it possible for her to get elected in our country, given the role the media plays in the national election cycles, along with the billion that it takes to run the ad campaigns?
Probably $2 billion now.
Okay.
Well, is America ready for that? I think America is ready for that, but whether that actually happens or not because of all the forces that are at play, I don't know. I think it's a little too early to call. I mean, we're still at 21%, 23, include the Senate, of women in decision-making positions in Congress. And that's pretty much what it is worldwide. Some areas in Scandinavia, it's 33. In some countries, it's almost 50. But generally, the average is 31%. So women have a ways to go in order to position themselves into these decision-making positions, and then you get more of a balance in that process because you've got the female perspective and the male perspective working on the same issues, and those perspectives are not generally the same, but they can be balanced. So you come out with a better product, whatever it is, decision product, than if you are just on one side or the other, male or dominantly male or dominantly female. The other thing is that women have been marginalized, not as much in this country, but around the world. Their voices have been marginalized. And when it comes to climate change, women, say in the developing world, they produce 65 to 85% of the household food. They are on the front lines of climate change. This hardly ever gets covered. Hardly ever gets covered. And climate refugees, the majority of those, there's over 100 million now that have had to move because of droughts and floods and food scarcity, et cetera. The majority of those are women and children, obviously. So women have a great stake in these decisions. And if you went through the press and you counted how many women have been quoted on climate change as compared to how many men, you would find it's mostly men. So there are those of us who are organizing, women who are organizing now to create a constituency of women's voices to rise up and speak up about this. And the hope would be that the media starts to cover that. I think, I think that we're in this transition. We're in a tremendous transition, and it's, as you said, it's not going to be easy.
I can give you the quick, do you want a quick political analysis of that? The quick political analysis is if the election were held today, Hillary Clinton would stomp whoever ran against her. She crushes Florida. She crushes Colorado. She's by far the leading candidate. But as you say, we're a long way away from there. What's most likely to happen is that in the midterms, it'll be a relatively low turnout. There are more Democratic senators who are up for election in purple states and even red states. So the chances of the Senate tipping are quite high. The House will stay exactly where it is. That changes again in 2016 when there are more Republicans up in the Senate than Democrats. And right now, it's hard to imagine anybody on the Republican side that will be able to lead a ticket like Hillary Clinton can lead a ticket. I mean, Hillary Clinton plays with a lot of folks on both sides of the aisle, and a lot of Republican women are going to switch over and vote for her. So again, with a snapshot of today, of course she could win. And by 2016, it'll be a different game. 2014 doesn't look pretty for Democrats.
Well, let's not forget that what we're talking about is Mother Earth, Mother Nature. And so this is a good segue into something that we're all working on with our dear friend Michael and Marilyn, called Earth's Call. So maybe, Forrest, you might want to just brief us a little bit from your perspective.
Sure. I'm just riding the coattails of Michael Fitzpatrick, who is somewhere here. I don't know where he is. There he is in the back. That guy in the back is a brilliant cellist and a wonderful soul, and somebody who has worked with the Dalai Lama for a very long time, Muhammad Ali for a while. I mean, it goes on and on. And if you're around him, it makes you smile. And he just got this idea. I think he landed, he'll tell you the story maybe later, but he landed serendipitously in Paris, as he often does in places. And somebody said, I don't know, I've got a 14-acre chateau. Would you like to have a giant concert here? And he just took it and ran with it. He made this thing himself and has been going around asking folks, and I think because of his spirit, for me certainly, I mean, he said, would you like to be a part of this? And I said, well, it depends on how much I have to pay. And I help a little bit. He has a lot of people who are helping. The fact that you two, with all the power and force that you bring to it and the spirit that you bring to it are helping. It's 2 weeks in 2015, June 2015. 2 weeks. It's kind of Burning Man without the desert, but a lot of people are going to be involved, and it is not only just music. It's people who are working the problem, and there are going to be seminars and all kinds of wonderful things. So anybody wants to know more about it, he's right back there, and you can ask me, and I'll tell you where he is because he knows about it, and I don't. But thank you for offering your services. Anybody else who could pitch in? It's going to be a wonderful, wonderful event.
Yeah, and I'll just say that Sally and I, Michael invited us to join and help bring climate and energy to this dialogue that's envisioned to be I believe it's a 9-day event. And why it's important to us is that here at AREI in our day, what we like to do is convene and really dig into these issues, but then we want to come up with roadmaps coming out of here and connecting the dots forward. And what's going to happen after we all leave here for 4 days that we've spent and look towards the UN meeting in New York and then beyond. And so Paris in 2015 is also going to be looking towards Paris in 2015 in December when the UNFCCC Council of the Parties meets for its 21st time, and Kyoto Protocol will become renegotiated. And perhaps it will be one of the last best chances for the world to come together through the auspice of the United Nations and really hash out this issue of climate and what are we going to do about it as 190 nations, and also look towards the general election in the United States, because we know that the U.S. must lead on this issue.
And just 2 small points. When you're talking about change, punctuated equilibrium. Things happen very quickly. They seem like they're not going to happen, and then all of a sudden they do. Look what happened with LGBT. Look how quickly that was transformed around this country. Look what happened with the Green Dragon right here in Aspen. Green Dragon, by the way, is a pot shop. So that has changed very quickly, and we need to go into the prisons and get some of those people who were put away for smoking pot out of there. But those changes can happen very, very quickly. And this is not just in Paris. It's going to be in places all around the world. And it's going to be available on all kinds of media that will jump on it, because this is not talking about how bad the problems are. This is a celebration of life. This is a chance to get past that front brain and hit people back here where they live and love. And that will bring people together in a way that no conversation ever could. So that's what we're hoping happens here.
And the heart. And the heart. There's a very special dimension to the music that's going to be engaged in this Earth's call. And it really is about vibration of music and how that brings humanity together. You know, we're in a place right now where we have a bit of a dilemma. Is humanity, to bridge to the last conversation we had, is humanity ready, capable, willing to collaborate on global commons, the global common good, that is necessary to meet the challenges of climate change.
I think humanity is. We just got some folks up there we got to convince. Folks with a lot of money, and they aren't easily convinced, but by God, they got money, we got people. And that's where change will happen.
Great.
Well, I think we have 1 minute or even less left, so I think let's end early for a change and thank Mr. Sawyer for joining us and all your good work.
If you got 1 minute, Michael's going to be playing right before Jimmy Carter, right? Mm-hmm. You got to hear him. He's just wonderful. If you can squeeze in here, you want to hear him play the cello. It's magical.
And also there may be another opportunity tomorrow night, I hope, on the artist panel, and that is open to the public for those of you who don't have passes, for a mere $10 to attend. So that might be a better place because Jimmy Carter is going to be a pretty packed house. But since you brought up the former president, and since we have a minute left, I think it's important to note that one of the things that we're honoring President Carter for, his leadership, not only on solar, but also the recent book that he wrote called A Time for Action, Women, Politics, and Power, and that he finally has addressed this issue of gender. And I think it's really important also to acknowledge that Michael, the man who's behind the Earth's Call, has been playing his cello with the Dalai Lama for a number of years, bringing music and that spiritual dimension into the room. And so I think those are some of the themes that we really want to focus on as we move forward through the rest of the summit.
Here's 10 seconds. I interviewed Jimmy Carter in Plains once, and I got all dressed up, and I sat in his house, and he came storming in, and he was covered in dirt, and said, "You know, I've been out digging a pond. Let's talk." That's Jimmy Carter.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Forrest.